It begins, as all great mysteries do, with an absence. A ship leaves port. A plane takes off. The sky is clear, the sea is calm, and every instrument reads normal. Then, without warning, without reason, the vessel ceases to exist. Not destroyed. Not crashed. Simply, gone. No distress signal cuts through the static. No emergency beacon activates. No piece of wreckage is ever recovered. It is as though whatever crossed that invisible threshold never belonged to our world at all. This is not a single incident or a rare anomaly. Across the last 2 centuries, more than 10,000 vessels and aircraft have disappeared inside a loosely defined patch of the western Atlantic Ocean. The region is roughly the size of the entire state of California, a triangle whose 3 points touch Miami, the island of Bermuda, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Cartographers never officially named it. Governments do not recognize it. Insurance companies charge no special rates to cross it. And yet, ask any person on any continent to describe it, and they will know exactly what you mean. The Bermuda Triangle. The Devil's Triangle. The Hoodoo Sea. The place where the laws of physics seem to bend, or break. What makes this stretch of ocean so terrifying is not what we have found there. It is what we have lost. Over 10,000 disappearances span every kind of vessel imaginable, fishing boats the length of a car, naval destroyers over 500 feet long, private yachts with experienced crews, cargo ships laden with steel and ore. Passenger aircraft vanish mid-flight with 30, 40, 100 souls on board. Military bombers disappear during routine training exercises in perfect weather. Even rescue aircraft sent to search for the missing have themselves been swallowed, vanishing from radar screens as though the ocean reached up and pulled them from the sky. Think about that for a moment. A ship is not a small thing. The USS Cyclops, one of the Triangle's most famous victims, was longer than 2 football fields placed end to end. It carried over 10,000 tons of manganese ore and a crew of more than 300 men. A vessel of that size does not simply slip beneath the waves unnoticed. It would take hours to sink, even under catastrophic damage. There would be time for radio calls, for lifeboats, for some sign of struggle. And yet the Cyclops vanished without a trace. No wreckage. No bodies. No signal. It sailed into the Bermuda Triangle and was never seen again. The same is true for the 5 Avenger torpedo bombers of Flight 19, 14 experienced pilots and crewmen who lifted off from a naval air station in Fort Lauderdale on a December afternoon in 1945, flew east into a cloudless sky, and disappeared from the face of the Earth. Their last radio transmissions captured men who were confused, disoriented, their compasses spinning uselessly, the sun setting in the wrong direction, the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction with no land in sight. "We must have gotten lost," the flight leader said. Those were his last recorded words. The official Navy report blamed the disappearance on unknown causes. But the men on the ground, the radio operators who listened to those final transmissions, the search coordinators who sent planes into the same patch of ocean, the families who waited on the runway, they knew. Something in that water was not right. And that is where our journey begins. Not with answers, but with questions. Because for every disappearance that can be explained by storm or human error, there is another that defies all logic. Cases where the facts make no sense. Cases where the evidence points to something beyond our current understanding. Over the next hour, we will explore the Bermuda Triangle from every angle. We will examine the most haunting disappearances, the ones that resist explanation. We will investigate the theories, both scientific and supernatural. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads. And when we reach the end, you will have to decide for yourself. Do you believe in the Devil's Triangle? Every legend has an origin. The Bermuda Triangle did not spring fully formed from the imagination of a single writer. It was built slowly, layer upon layer, over the course of 5 centuries. But long before Columbus set sail, before the term Bermuda Triangle even entered any language, the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean already knew that something strange haunted these waters. The Taino people, who inhabited the islands of Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas, told stories of a powerful spirit called Guabansex, the goddess of storms and chaos. She was said to dwell in the deepest part of the ocean, at a place where the water churned without wind and the sky changed color without warning. Sailors who encountered her domain, according to Taino legend, would lose all sense of direction. Their compasses would spin. The stars would disappear from the sky. And they would sail in circles until their strength gave out and the ocean swallowed them whole. The Arawak people had similar stories, of a region they called Mare Diabolai, the Devil's Sea, where canoes disappeared and voices could be heard calling from beneath the waves. They avoided this area entirely, even when shorter routes would have saved days of travel. To venture into the Devil's Sea was to invite death. These legends are often dismissed as primitive superstition. But they reveal something important, even before the first recorded disappearance, before the first ship vanished and the first book was written, the people who knew these waters best understood that there was something wrong with this part of the ocean. They could not explain it. They did not try to. They simply respected it, and stayed away. Perhaps we should have listened. The first recorded hint of strangeness in these waters comes from the journals of Christopher Columbus. On October 11, 1492, as the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina sailed through what we now call the Sargasso Sea, a region that overlaps significantly with the Triangle, Columbus made a curious entry. His compass, he noted, had begun to behave erratically. The needle, which should have pointed unerringly toward magnetic north, drifted as though confused. Columbus did not mention this to his crew, knowing how superstitious sailors could be. But he recorded it in his private log. That same night, witnesses on deck saw a strange light on the horizon, a small flame, Columbus wrote, that rose and fell, rising and falling, appearing and disappearing. Some historians believe it was a meteor. Others suggest a distant fire on land. But the image of a dancing flame over the dark Atlantic, seen by the very first European explorer to cross these waters, became the first thread in a very long tapestry. Over the following centuries, the Sargasso Sea earned a grim reputation among sailors. This was the place where ships went to die. The prevailing winds often died here, leaving vessels becalmed for weeks or months. The sargassum seaweed, thick, brown, tangled, stretched across the surface in endless mats, giving the water an almost solid appearance. Sailors told stories of ghost ships trapped in the weed, their crews long dead but the vessels preserved by the calm waters and low oxygen. The Sargasso Sea was a graveyard, and the Bermuda Triangle was its heart. But the modern legend, the one we recognize today, is a product of the 20th century. It began quietly in 1950, when a journalist named Edward Van Winkle Jones wrote a short article for the Associated Press. Jones had been researching shipping losses in the Atlantic and noticed a pattern, an unusual number of disappearances clustered around a specific region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. His article was only a few paragraphs long, but it planted a seed. 2 years later, in 1952, the magazine Fate, a publication devoted to the paranormal, ran a feature titled Sea Mystery at Our Back Door. Its author, George X. Sand, was the first to suggest that something deliberate might be at work, that these were not random tragedies but connected events. And he gave the region a name, the Bermuda Triangle. The name did not stick immediately. But the stories did. In 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis published an article in Argosy magazine under the title The Deadly Bermuda Triangle. Gaddis was the first to connect all the famous cases in a single narrative. He linked the disappearance of Flight 19 to the vanishing of the USS Cyclops, of the Star Tiger and the Star Ariel, of the Marine Sulphur Queen. He argued that these were not isolated incidents, they were evidence of something dangerous lurking in the region. Gaddis's article was a sensation. Letters poured into the magazine from readers who had their own stories, their own theories, their own fears. 2 years later, a man named John Wallace Spencer published a book called Limbo of the Lost. Spencer was not a scientist or a historian. He was a merchant marine officer who had sailed through the Triangle and been deeply unsettled by the experience. His book was sensational, speculative, and wildly popular. It spent months on bestseller lists and introduced the Bermuda Triangle to a global audience. But the book that changed everything came in 1974. Charles Berlitz was a linguist, a grandson of the famous language school founder, and a man with a deep fascination for the paranormal. He had written about Atlantis, about UFOs, about telepathy. But the Bermuda Triangle was his masterpiece. His book, titled simply The Bermuda Triangle, was a publishing phenomenon. It sold over 20 million copies worldwide and was translated into 30 languages. Berlitz wove the disappearances into a single terrifying narrative, presenting each case as a piece of a larger puzzle. He proposed theories that ranged from the scientific to the wildly speculative: alien abduction, Atlantean energy crystals, time warps, portals to other dimensions. Mainstream scientists and journalists attacked the book, pointing out errors in Berlitz's research, exaggerations in his storytelling, and outright fabrications in some cases. But the damage was done. The Bermuda Triangle had entered the global imagination. It was no longer a regional curiosity. It was a myth. Television documentaries followed. Hollywood movies. Dozens of books, each more speculative than the last. The triangle became a character in its own right, a dark, sentient presence in the Atlantic, hungry for ships and planes. And yet, here is the strangest part of the legend: the more carefully you examine the evidence, the more complicated the picture becomes. Many of the disappearances that Berlitz described were not nearly as mysterious as he claimed. Some ships sank during hurricanes. Some planes ran out of fuel. Some vessels were lost in perfectly ordinary ways, but their stories were repackaged as mysteries because the truth was less interesting. But not all of them. Remove every exaggerated case. Throw out every unreliable source. Strip away the Hollywood embellishments and the tabloid sensationalism. What remains is a small set of disappearances that still defy explanation. Cases where the facts are verified, the circumstances are clear, and the outcome is impossible. Those are the cases we need to examine. Let us begin with the most famous disappearance in the history of the Bermuda Triangle, the case that, more than any other, established the region's fearful reputation. December 5, 1945. Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A Thursday afternoon, warm and clear, the kind of perfect flying weather that the Florida coast is famous for. 14 men climbed into 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. These were rugged, reliable aircraft, workhorses of the Pacific War, recently returned from combat and assigned to training duties. Each carried a pilot and either a gunner or a radioman. Their mission was routine: navigation exercise number 1. Fly east from Fort Lauderdale to a point north of the Bahamas, drop practice bombs on a target range, continue east for a short distance, then turn north and finally southwest, returning to base in a great triangular loop. The entire exercise was expected to take about 2 hours. The flight leader was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a veteran pilot with over 2,500 hours of flying time. He had served in the Pacific Theater and had recently completed a combat tour. Taylor was not a novice. He was an experienced aviator who had flown hundreds of hours over open water. At 2:10 p.m., the 5 Avengers roared down the runway and climbed into the Florida sky. The first hour of the flight was uneventful. The planes reached the practice target area, dropped their bombs, and began the second leg of their journey. But at 3:45 p.m., a radio operator at the Fort Lauderdale base picked up a transmission that stopped him cold. "I don't know where we are," a voice said. It was Taylor. "We must have gotten lost after that last turn." The operator asked for Taylor's position. The response was confused: "I'm not sure. We seem to be off course." Over the next hour, the transmissions became increasingly strange. Taylor reported that his compass was malfunctioning, both his main compass and his backup. Other pilots in the flight confirmed the same problem. Their instruments were giving contradictory readings. They could see land below them, but they could not identify it. Taylor believed they were over the Florida Keys, the chain of small islands stretching southwest from the mainland. But he was wrong. They were over the Bahamas, nearly 200 miles north of where Taylor thought they were. This error is crucial. If Taylor had turned west, toward where he believed Florida to be, he would have flown deeper into the Atlantic, away from land. Which is exactly what he did. "Both my compasses are out," Taylor radioed. "I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys." The base tried to guide him. They told him to fly west. But Taylor, convinced he was over the Gulf of Mexico, kept flying east, deeper into the ocean. As the sun sank toward the horizon, the transmissions became more urgent and more confused. Other pilots began to break in. "Damn it," one voice said, barely audible. "If we would just fly west, we would get home." At 5:50 p.m., the base attempted a radio direction finding fix. They managed to get a bearing on Taylor's aircraft. It placed him over the Atlantic, well north of the Bahamas, heading east. But the transmission was weak, and the bearing was inaccurate by several degrees. By 6 p.m., the sun had set. The Avengers were running low on fuel. Taylor made one final transmission. "We'll have to ditch unless land shows up. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." Those were the last words ever heard from Flight 19. The Navy launched the largest search and rescue operation in its history. Over 300 aircraft, dozens of ships, thousands of personnel. They searched for days, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No life rafts. No debris. No oil slicks. The 5 Avengers and their 14 crew members had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. And then, adding to the mystery, one of the search aircraft, a PBM Mariner with 13 crewmen on board, also disappeared. It had radioed its position at 7:27 p.m., reporting that it was approaching the search area. Moments later, it vanished from radar. A passing tanker reported seeing a massive explosion in the sky around that time, but when search vessels reached the area, they found nothing. 27 men lost in one night. 27 men who simply disappeared. The Navy's official report was a masterwork of bureaucratic obfuscation. It concluded that the cause of the disappearance was unknown and suggested that Taylor had become disoriented and led his flight into the ocean after running out of fuel. But the report left many questions unanswered. Why did all 5 compasses fail simultaneously? Why were the pilots unable to orient themselves despite clear weather and radio contact? Why was no wreckage ever found, not even a single piece of debris from 5 aircraft weighing over 6 tons each? Decades later, the Flight 19 case remains the Bermuda Triangle's most powerful mystery, not because it cannot be explained, but because the explanation raises so many unsettling questions. For months after the United States entered the First World War, the Navy sent its largest fuel ship on a routine voyage from Rio de Janeiro to Baltimore. The USS Cyclops was a Proteus-class collier, 542 feet long, with a displacement of nearly 20,000 tons. She was the largest ship in the Navy's fleet at the time under the command of Lieutenant Commander George Worley, a German-born officer with a reputation for eccentricity and a temper. The Cyclops departed Rio on February 16, 1918, carrying 306 crew members and passengers and a full cargo of manganese ore, a heavy, dense material used in steel production. She made an unscheduled stop in Barbados on March 3 and 4, taking on additional supplies. Then she set sail for Baltimore. She was never seen again. No distress call was received. No storm of unusual severity was reported in the area. No enemy submarines, the standard explanation for wartime disappearances, were known to be operating in that part of the Atlantic. The Cyclops simply vanished. The Navy conducted the most extensive search in its history, nearly 2 months of scouring the Atlantic from the Caribbean to the Chesapeake Bay. They found nothing. Not a single piece of debris. Not a single body. The official report, after months of investigation, concluded the disappearance of the USS Cyclops has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy, all attempts to locate her having been unsuccessful. Many theories have been proposed. A catastrophic structural failure, the manganese ore could have shifted and caused the ship to capsize. A sudden storm, though no storms were reported. A German U-boat attack, though no German records mentioned sinking a ship of the Cyclops' size in that area. a Bermuda Triangle-style vanishing. The most likely explanation is that the Cyclops encountered a rogue wave or structural failure during a storm and sank before a distress signal could be sent. But the absence of any wreckage, of any evidence at all, means the case remains open. President Woodrow Wilson, who had served as a historian before entering politics, summed up the mystery with a phrase that still echoes, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." British South American Airways was a post-war airline that served routes across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and South America. It had a reputation for reliability, but it also had a curious connection to the Bermuda Triangle. On January 29, 1948, the Star Tiger, a 4-engine Avro Tudor 4, departed Lisbon, Portugal, bound for Bermuda. On board were 6 crew members and 25 passengers, including a member of parliament and several prominent business figures. The flight was uneventful for most of its journey. At 3 a.m. on January 30th, the Star Tiger's captain radioed his position, approximately 400 miles northeast of Bermuda. The weather was clear. All systems were functioning normally. The flight was slightly ahead of schedule. Then the Star Tiger vanished. No distress call. No unusual radio transmissions. No weather warnings in the area. The plane simply disappeared between one scheduled position report and the next. A massive search was launched by the U.S. Navy, the British Royal Navy, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Aircraft and ships covered the Atlantic from Bermuda to Newfoundland. They found no trace of the Star Tiger or its 31 occupants. The official investigation concluded that the aircraft had suffered a catastrophic failure so sudden that no radio call was possible. But no cause could be determined. Exactly 1 year later, on January 17, 1949, the Star Ariel, another Tudor 4, sister aircraft to the Star Tiger, departed Bermuda for Kingston, Jamaica. The weather was clear. The flight was routine. At 7:45 a.m., the captain reported his position and estimated arrival time. 20 minutes later, the Star Ariel vanished from the radio. Again, no distress call. Again, no wreckage. Again, no explanation. 20 people lost. 2 aircraft of the same type, on similar routes, within a year of each other, both vanishing without a word. The British government grounded the entire Tudor for fleet after the second disappearance, effectively ending the aircraft's commercial career. But the question remains, how does a modern, well-maintained, professionally crewed aircraft vanish from the sky without a trace, twice? February 2, 1963. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a converted tanker carrying 15,000 tons of molten sulfur, departed Beaumont, Texas, bound for Norfolk, Virginia. She had a crew of 39 men and a cargo that had to be kept at precisely 275 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to remain liquid but not so hot as to cause a fire. The last communication from the ship was a routine position report on February 3. She was approaching the Florida Straits. Weather was fair. The Marine Sulphur Queen was never seen again. When the Coast Guard reached the area after the ship failed to arrive in Norfolk, they found scattered debris, life jackets, a single oar, pieces of wooden decking, a navigational chart. But no hull, no cargo, no bodies, no survivors. The official investigation was the most thorough in Coast Guard history up to that time. They interviewed everyone who had been involved in the ship's maintenance, examined its records, analyzed its structural integrity. The verdict, cause of loss unknown. The ship had a history of minor fires in its sulfur tanks, but nothing that seemed life-threatening. The molten sulfur was a dangerous material. If it came into contact with even a small amount of water, it could produce a cloud of toxic hydrogen sulfide gas, which could incapacitate the crew within seconds. But even that scenario would have left some trace, some wreckage, some sign of what had happened. The Marine Sulphur Queen joined the growing list of vessels that had entered the Bermuda Triangle and never left. Not every disappearance happens in an instant. Some are discovered slowly, in stages, as the evidence of something wrong accumulates. In September 1955, the yacht Connemara 4 was found drifting empty in the Atlantic, approximately 250 miles southeast of Bermuda. The yacht was intact. The sails were set. The engine was running. The table below deck was set for a meal. But the crew of 5 had vanished. A passing freighter, the SS Saxon, spotted the drifting yacht and attempted to raise her crew by radio. There was no response. A boarding party found the yacht in perfect condition, no signs of struggle, no damage, no leaks. The crew simply wasn't there. Where did they go? The only plausible explanation is that they abandoned ship voluntarily, but why abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel? And why not return to it? The Connemara 4 story is just one of several ghost ship cases in the Bermuda Triangle. In 1921, the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner, was found grounded on the shoals of Cape Hatteras. Her sails were set, her galley was fully stocked, her crew's belongings were still in their quarters. But the crew had vanished. The only living thing on board was the ship's cat. The Carroll A. Deering investigation was one of the most extensive in Coast Guard history. The FBI was called in, unusual for a maritime case. Theories ranged from piracy to mutiny to a Bermuda Triangle-style phenomenon. But no explanation was ever proven. These ghost ships haunt the Bermuda Triangle's reputation. They are impossible to explain away as storms or mechanical failures. Something happened to those crews, something that caused them to leave safe, seaworthy vessels and disappear into the ocean. Something that, in most cases, we still do not understand. What causes these disappearances? Over the decades, dozens of theories have been proposed. Some are grounded in rigorous science. Others are pure speculation. And a few are so strange that they challenge the very boundaries of what we consider possible. Let us examine them honestly. Rogue waves. For centuries, sailors told stories of walls of water rising without warning from the open ocean, waves so tall they could swallow a ship whole. Scientists dismissed these stories as sailors' folklore until January 1, 1995, when the Draupner wave was measured by an oil platform in the North Sea. It was 84 feet high, taller than a 7-story building. Since then, satellite data has revealed that rogue waves are far more common than anyone believed. In a single 3-week period, radar satellites detected 10 individual rogue waves over 80 feet high. Some were measured at over 100 feet. The Bermuda Triangle is a perfect breeding ground for rogue waves. The Gulf Stream flows through the region at up to 4 knots, creating a powerful current that collides with waves traveling in the opposite direction. Storms in the area are frequent and violent. When current, storm, and wave combine, the result is a wall of water with enough force to snap a ship in half or flip it end over end. Could rogue waves explain the disappearances? Yes, some of them. A sudden, massive wave could overwhelm a ship before its crew had time to react. There would be no distress signal, no time to launch lifeboats. The ship would simply disappear. But this theory cannot explain the disappearance of aircraft. It cannot explain why some ships were found drifting with no crew. And it cannot explain the complete absence of debris in so many cases. Methane hydrate eruptions. This is one of the most compelling scientific theories, and one of the most controversial. Beneath the ocean floor of the Bermuda Triangle lies a vast reservoir of methane hydrate, a frozen compound of methane gas trapped in ice-like crystals. Under normal conditions, these deposits are stable. But if the ocean temperature rises or seismic activity occurs, the hydrates can destabilize, releasing massive bubbles of methane gas that rise toward the surface. A methane bubble of sufficient size would have 2 effects. First, the density of water above the bubble would drop dramatically. A ship passing through this aerated water would lose buoyancy and sink within seconds, with no time to send a distress signal. Second, the methane would reach the atmosphere, creating a cloud of flammable gas that could suffocate aircraft engines, which require oxygen to burn, or even ignite in a catastrophic explosion. In 2023, scientists from the United States Geological Survey identified a massive deposit of methane hydrate just off the coast of North Carolina, at the northern edge of the Bermuda Triangle. The deposit is estimated to contain enough methane to power the entire United States for decades. But there is a catch. No one has ever observed a methane eruption large enough to sink a ship or down a plane. The theory remains unproven. Magnetic anomalies. The Bermuda Triangle is one of only two places on Earth where the magnetic North Pole and the geographic North Pole align on a regular basis. This line, called the agonic line, passes directly through the region. When a compass is used west of the agonic line, it points slightly east of true north. East of the agonic line, it points slightly west. But right on the line, the compass points to true north with zero variation, causing confusion for navigators who have become accustomed to compensating for magnetic deviation. In the days before GPS, this magnetic quirk could have caused serious navigational errors. A pilot who thought he was flying west might actually be flying northwest. A captain who believed he was steering toward open water could be steering directly toward a reef. But this theory has a significant weakness: modern navigation relies on satellites, not compasses. And even in the 1940s and 1950s, experienced pilots and navigators knew how to account for magnetic variation. Electronic fog. Several pilots who survived incidents in the Bermuda Triangle have described a strange phenomenon, a gray, metallic fog that appears without warning, filling the cockpit with static electricity, causing instruments to malfunction and engines to sputter. Bruce Jernan, a pilot who flew through the Triangle in 1970, described how his plane became enveloped in a thick, grey, swirling fog that seemed to have a life of its own. His compass spun in circles. His radio emitted strange static. The sky outside turned a sickly green. And then, the fog cleared, and Jernan found himself miles from where he had been, with no memory of the passage of time. Skeptics dismiss electronic fog as a meteorological phenomenon, a type of cloud that can generate static electricity under certain conditions. But those who have experienced it describe it in terms that suggest something far stranger. Time distortions. If electronic fog is strange, time distortions are stranger still, and yet, they appear in multiple accounts from the Bermuda Triangle. Sailors and pilots have reported incidents where clocks ran slow or fast by hours or even days. Chronometers that had been synchronized before entering the triangle would show wildly different times upon leaving it. In some accounts, days seemed to pass in what felt like hours. In others, hours stretched into what felt like days. Physicists have proposed that the Bermuda Triangle might sit on a time rift, a point where the Earth's electromagnetic field is so distorted that it affects the flow of time itself. This is pure speculation, of course. But the consistency of the reports, from independent witnesses over decades, is difficult to dismiss. Alien abductions. The most popular of the supernatural theories is also the most straightforward. Extraterrestrials have established an underwater base in the Bermuda Triangle, and they capture ships and planes for study. Proponents point to an impressive array of evidence: radar contacts showing objects rising from the ocean at impossible speeds, sonar readings of massive structures on the ocean floor, reports of strange lights seen over the triangle for centuries. Believers argue that the disappearances are not accidents, they are abductions, carried out by beings whose technology we cannot comprehend. The scientific response is predictable: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and no such evidence exists. No alien craft has been recovered. No communication has been established. No pattern of abduction has been identified. And yet, the alien theory persists, in part because it is the most satisfying narrative, and in part because it is the only theory that can explain all the disappearances at once. Atlantis technology. In 1968, pilots flying over the Bahamas noticed geometric shapes beneath the clear water near the island of Bimini. Further investigation revealed what appeared to be a road made of massive rectangular stones, arranged in a line stretching for nearly half a mile. The Bimini Road, as it came to be called, was immediately seized upon by believers in Atlantis. Here, they claimed, was proof of the lost civilization. The road was part of a temple, a harbor, or a wall that once surrounded the fabled city. The scientific explanation is mundane: the Bimini Road is a natural formation of beach rock that cracked into rectangular shapes over thousands of years. Similar formations exist elsewhere in the Caribbean. But the connection to Atlantis gave the Bermuda Triangle a new dimension. If Atlantis had been a real civilization with advanced technology, energy crystals, anti-gravity devices, or force fields, then perhaps that technology was still active, buried beneath the ocean floor, occasionally activating and swallowing anything that crossed its path. It is a beautiful idea. It is also completely unsupported by any credible evidence. But the romance of it, the lost city, the ancient power, the mystery beneath the waves, keeps the theory alive. There is one more theory to consider. It is not glamorous. It does not sell books or make compelling documentaries. But it may be the truth. The Bermuda Triangle might not be a mystery at all. Consider the following facts. The Triangle is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, crossed by hundreds of thousands of vessels each year. It is also one of the most dangerous weather regions on Earth, experiencing hurricanes, waterspouts, rogue waves, and sudden squalls. The Gulf Stream moves through the area at speeds of up to 4 knots, fast enough to scatter debris across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. The ocean depth reaches over 30,000 feet in some areas, far too deep for any wreck to be discovered without a systematic search. When you account for these factors, the number of disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle is statistically unremarkable. The United States Coast Guard has stated publicly that it does not recognize the existence of the Bermuda Triangle as a dangerous area. Lloyd's of London, the world's oldest and most respected marine insurance market, does not charge higher premiums for vessels passing through the region. In other words, the Bermuda Triangle might simply be a very busy, very dangerous patch of ocean where things occasionally go wrong, and where the legendary status causes people to pay more attention to the losses that occur there. But then, what explains the cases that resist this kind of rationalization? What about Flight 19, whose pilots were clear-headed and experienced? What about the Cyclops, whose loss remains the Navy's greatest peacetime mystery? What about the Star Tiger and the Star Ariel, 2 identical aircraft that vanished on identical routes in identical circumstances? Even the skeptics must admit that something is strange about this region. Even the rationalists must acknowledge that some questions remain unanswered. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle is not a supernatural vortex, but it is not a statistical illusion either. Maybe it is a place where natural forces, rogue waves, methane eruptions, weather patterns, magnetic anomalies, converge with an unusual frequency, creating a region that is genuinely more dangerous than the surrounding ocean. Or maybe the truth is simpler still. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle is a mystery because we want it to be a mystery. Maybe the human mind craves stories that cannot be fully explained, mysteries that leave room for wonder, for speculation, for the thrill of the unknown. December 22, 1967. The weather was mild, the sea calm, the Christmas lights of Miami glittered on the horizon. The Witchcraft, a 42-foot luxury cabin cruiser with a fiberglass hull and a registered top speed of 30 miles per hour, had just dropped anchor 1 mile off the Miami coast, well within sight of land, in water shallow enough that the ocean floor was visible beneath the hull. On board were 2 men, Daniel Berwick, a wealthy Miami hotel owner, and his friend Father Patrick Horgan, a Catholic priest. They had come here to enjoy the evening, to watch the city lights, to celebrate the approaching holiday. The boat was equipped with every modern convenience, a radio, navigational equipment, life jackets, an inflatable raft. It was, by every measure, a safe and sensible outing. At 9:30 p.m., Berwick radioed the Coast Guard. He spoke calmly, without panic, his voice measured, "We have struck something in the water and our propeller is damaged. Please send a tow. We are drifting slowly toward the beach." The Coast Guard dispatcher noted the position, 1 mile off Miami Beach. The water depth was no more than 20 feet. The distance to shore was a 5-minute walk on the ocean floor. A rescue vessel, the CGR 95380, was dispatched immediately. It arrived at the Witchcraft's last known position in less than 20 minutes. The water was calm. The night was clear. The city lights were bright and unmistakable. And the Witchcraft was gone. Not sinking. Not drifting. Not capsized. Gone. The Coast Guard searched the area thoroughly. They found no debris, no life rafts, no oil slick, no sign of the 42-foot vessel or the 2 men aboard. They expanded the search to cover 1,000 square miles. They sent divers to examine the ocean floor. They interviewed everyone who had seen the witchcraft that evening. Nothing. The official report listed the case as a missing, presumed lost, but lost how? A 42-foot boat does not sink in 20 feet of water without leaving some trace. Even if it had been struck by a passing ship, the most plausible explanation, there would have been debris, witnesses, some evidence of impact. The witchcraft joined the growing list of Bermuda Triangle disappearances that defy rational explanation. It is, in some ways, the most unsettling case of all, not because it happened far from help in the middle of the ocean, but because it happened within sight of shore, in shallow water, in a place so safe that no one would have thought to be afraid. On December 1, 1925, the SS Cotopaxi, a 235-foot freighter, departed Charleston, South Carolina, bound for Havana, Cuba. She carried a cargo of coal and a crew of 32 men under the command of Captain Wilbert Meyer, an experienced mariner who had sailed these waters for decades. 2 days later, on December 3, the Cotopaxi made her last scheduled radio transmission. She was roughly 50 miles southwest of the Florida coast, in good weather, making normal speed. She was expected to arrive in Havana the following day. She never arrived. When the Cotopaxi failed to make port, the Coast Guard launched a search. They found no trace of the ship, no wreckage, no debris, no sign of any distress. The wireless operator at the naval station in Jacksonville had received no distress signals. The weather had been clear. The ship was well maintained and adequately crewed. After 3 months of searching, the Cotopaxi was officially declared lost. The cause of her disappearance was listed as unknown. And that is where the story stayed for 90 years. In 2015, a Coast Guard survey crew mapping the ocean floor off the coast of St. Augustine, Florida, discovered a previously unknown wreck at a depth of 150 feet. The wreck was not on any chart. It had never been reported. The survey crew noted its position and moved on. But a team of wreck divers later investigated the site and identified the ship as the Cotopaxi. Here was the great mystery, finally solved. The ship had sunk less than 60 miles from where she had been reported missing, in water shallow enough for a diver to reach. How had she not been found for 90 years? The answer, in this case, is simple. The Coast Guard had searched in the wrong place, assuming the Cotopaxi had continued on her course toward Havana. In reality, she had apparently turned or drifted north-northwest at some point after her last radio transmission, a turn that carried her directly into the path of a sudden, violent squall that had been recorded in the area on the night of December 3. The Cotopaxi had probably capsized in the storm, sinking so quickly that no distress signal was sent. Her wreck had lain on the ocean floor for nearly a century before someone happened to look in the right place. This case is a powerful reminder that not every Bermuda Triangle mystery is a true mystery. Some are simply failures of search, errors of assumption, or gaps in the historical record. But it also illustrates why so many cases remain unsolved. The ocean is vast, the records are incomplete, and the human mind naturally fills gaps with stories. July 14, 1962. A KC-97 Stratofreighter, a 4-engine military cargo and refueling aircraft, took off from McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey on a routine training mission. The flight plan called for a route that would carry the aircraft south along the coast, then out over the Bermuda Triangle for a navigation exercise. On board were 8 crew members, 3 officers and 5 enlisted men, all experienced, all fully briefed on the mission parameters. The flight was routine until the aircraft reached the exercise zone. At that point, the KC-97's pilot radioed a position report. The coordinates placed the aircraft in the western Atlantic, near the northern edge of the Bermuda Triangle. Then, nothing. No distress signal. No indication of trouble. The KC-97 simply stopped transmitting. A search operation was launched immediately. Aircraft and ships from the Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard combed the area. They searched for days, covering thousands of square miles. They found no debris, no life rafts, no oil sheen, no bodies, nothing. The KC-97 and its 8 crew members were declared missing, presumed lost at sea. The Air Force investigation concluded the cause was undetermined. Like so many other cases in this region, the disappearance of the KCR-97 is a mystery not because of what we know, but because of what we don't know. In the absence of any evidence, the mind is free to imagine any explanation, from the mundane to the extraordinary. What unites these cases, from Flight 19 to the KCR-97, from the witchcraft to the Cyclops, is a pattern of sudden, unexplained loss in conditions that should not have been dangerous. Good weather. Experienced crews. Functional equipment. And then, in an instant, nothing. Skeptics argue that every case can be explained by human error, mechanical failure, or weather conditions that were not properly documented. But taken together, the sheer number of these cases in one region of the ocean suggests either an extraordinary run of bad luck or something that we do not yet understand. One of the most overlooked factors in the Bermuda Triangle mystery is the Gulf Stream itself. This powerful ocean current moves through the center of the triangle at speeds of up to 4.5 knots, faster than a person can swim and carrying enough force to push debris, wreckage, and even whole ships across vast distances in a single day. When a vessel sinks in the Gulf Stream, its debris does not remain at the site of the sinking. It is carried northward, sometimes as fast as 100 miles per day. By the time searchers arrive at the last known position, the debris field has already dispersed across a massive area, making it almost impossible to locate. This explains why so many Bermuda Triangle disappearances leave no trace. It is not that the wreckage does not exist. It is that the wreckage moves so quickly and so far from the point of loss that conventional search patterns miss it entirely. The same current affects aircraft debris. When a plane crashes into the ocean, small pieces of wreckage, seat cushions, pieces of paneling, life vests, are carried by the current at the same rapid rate. By the time search aircraft arrive on scene, the most visible debris has already drifted miles away from the actual impact site. There is also a psychological dimension to the Bermuda Triangle mystery that deserves attention. Once a region has been labeled as dangerous, every subsequent incident that occurs within its boundaries is automatically viewed through the lens of that label. When a ship sinks in the Bermuda Triangle, it is reported as another victim of the Devil's Triangle. When an identical ship sinks in the same way off the coast of Norway, it is reported as a maritime accident. Confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms our existing beliefs, plays a powerful role here. If you believe the Bermuda Triangle is a dangerous place, you will notice every disappearance that occurs there and ignore the thousands of safe passages that happen every day. The scientific term for this is salience bias. We remember what is unusual and forget what is routine. The 10,000 ships that cross the Bermuda Triangle safely every year are not news. The one that disappears is a headline. This is not to dismiss the genuine mystery of the cases we have examined. It is simply to acknowledge that the human mind naturally amplifies the mystery by filtering out the mundane. To be fair to the skeptics, and their position deserves a full hearing, the United States military maintains that there is nothing unusual about the Bermuda Triangle. The U.S. Navy's official position is that the region is no more dangerous than any other part of the Atlantic Ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard publishes a statement on its website that reads, in part, "The Coast Guard does not recognize the existence of the so-called Bermuda Triangle as a geographic area of specific hazard to ships or aircraft." Lloyd's of London, the world's leading marine insurance market, has conducted its own analysis and found no basis for charging higher premiums for vessels crossing the Bermuda Triangle. The statistical rate of loss is not significantly different from any other busy shipping lane. In 2013, the World Wildlife Fund published a study of the world's most dangerous shipping regions, and the Bermuda Triangle did not make the list. These facts are difficult to reconcile with the popular image of the triangle as a place of supernatural danger. If the region were truly as dangerous as legend suggests, insurance companies, militaries, and shipping lines would long ago have taken action. And yet, the cases remain. Not every disappearance can be written off as statistical noise. Not every witness was mistaken. Not every official report was complete. Perhaps the most honest conclusion we can reach is simply this: we do not know everything about the Bermuda Triangle. We may never know. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored. Of the Earth's oceans, more than 80% remain unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. The Bermuda Triangle sits above a complex geological region where shallow seas plunge into deep trenches, where the Gulf Stream collides with opposing currents, where the ocean floor contains vast deposits of frozen methane, and where magnetic anomalies have been recorded for centuries. There is still a great deal we do not understand about how these factors interact. It is possible, even likely, that future research will explain some of the remaining mysteries as the result of natural phenomena that we have not yet properly understood. But it is also possible that some of the mysteries will never be explained. That the Bermuda Triangle will remain what it has always been, a place where the boundaries of human knowledge meet the immensity of the natural world, and where the unknown still holds its ground. So where does this leave us? After examining the cases, the theories, the evidence, and the lack of it, what is the truth about the Bermuda Triangle? The answer is more complex than you might expect. The Bermuda Triangle is not a supernatural vortex. It is not an alien base. It is not a portal to another dimension. But it is also not nothing. The region is genuinely dangerous. Storms gather there with unusual frequency. The Gulf Stream moves fast and unpredictably. The ocean floor is treacherous, with shallow reefs and abyssal trenches in close proximity. Human error, compounded by these conditions, accounts for many of the disappearances. But there are cases that do not fit this explanation. There are ships that vanished in calm weather. Planes that disappeared while in radio contact with multiple ground stations. Vessels found intact and empty, with no sign of what caused their crews to abandon them. The truth may be that the Bermuda Triangle is a place where several different kinds of danger converge in a relatively small area. Rogue waves. Methane eruptions. Magnetic anomalies. Severe weather. Heavy traffic. Human fallibility. Each of these factors, on its own, is not mysterious. But when they combine, when a pilot becomes disoriented exactly where the magnetic variation confuses his instruments, when a ship encounters a rogue wave exactly where a methane deposit has weakened the water density, the results can look impossible, even supernatural. It is the confluence of the ordinary that creates the extraordinary. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling truth of all. The Bermuda Triangle does not need aliens or time portals or ancient technology to be frightening. It is frightening enough on its own terms, a place where nature, in all its power and unpredictability, can erase a ship or a plane so completely that no trace remains. The legend of the Devil's Triangle will continue. New documentaries will be made. New books will be written. New cases will be added to the list. And new viewers will sit in the dark, watching, wondering, asking themselves the same questions that people have asked for over a century. What happened to all those ships and planes? Where did they go? Will we ever know? The Triangle does not give up its secrets easily. And perhaps that is why we keep watching. Perhaps the mystery is the point. The end. Block section duration estimated words. : 1 hook, something is out there midnight to 8 o'clock / 1 500. 2 the birth of a legend 8 to 8 p.m. / 2 200. 3 the unanswered cases 20:00-45:00 / 4800. 4 theories, from science to the unknown 45:00-55:00 / 2 500. 5 the final verdict 55:00-60:00 / 1000. Total 60 minute 11 500 words. The Bermuda Triangle, in the end, is a mirror. It reflects our deepest fears, our insatiable curiosity, and our stubborn refusal to accept that some questions may never be answered. We live in an age of information, where every fact seems to be available at our fingertips. And yet, here is a mystery that has resisted every attempt to solve it for over 200 years. That resistance is part of its power. In a world that has been mapped, photographed, measured, and catalogued from space, the Bermuda Triangle represents one of the last remaining pockets of the unknown. It reminds us that the ocean, which covers 71% of our planet, still holds secrets we have not unlocked. That nature, in all its power, can still surprise us. That there is still room for wonder. Perhaps that is why we keep returning to the story. Not because we expect to find the answer, but because the search itself is meaningful. Because asking the question, what happened, is more important than finding the answer. The next time you fly over the Atlantic, look down at the water. Somewhere below, in that vast blue expanse, there are wrecks that have never been found. Ships that sailed into history and never sailed out. Planes that vanished into thin air. Crews that disappeared without a trace. They are down there, beneath the waves, holding their secrets. And perhaps, somewhere in that deep, dark water, the Devil's Triangle is still waiting.